Welcome, everyone. I'm Catherine Lavender, the Data Project Manager for NACDA, and this is our NACDA Data on Aging podcast series. NACDA is the National Archive of Computerized Data on Aging at ICPSR at the University of Michigan and is funded by the National Institute on Aging. We seek out and preserve data relevant to gerontological research, kind of like a data library, curating the data as needed to promote effective research use, and we share the data with the research community free of charge. We're proud to say that we're one of the largest libraries of data on aging in the United States, offering opportunities for secondary analysis on major issues of scientific and policy relevance. We hope to connect with the gerontological research community using this podcast series and plan to highlight data resources and researchers, talk through data concerns, and learn the stories behind the projects. You can find out more about NACDA and ICPSR by visiting nacda-aging.org. Today, our guest is Dr. Linda Waite, who is the George Herbert Mead Distinguished Service Professor of Sociology and Senior Fellow at NORC at the University of Chicago. Her research interests include social demography, aging, the family, health, sexuality, and social well-being. Her current research focuses on the National Social Life, Health, and Aging Project, also known as NSHAP, which she directs. NSHAP examines the links between social connectivity and health at older ages and has at its heart a nationally representative longitudinal survey of older adults. She is the recipient of a Merit Award from the National Institute on Aging, National Institutes of Health, and an elected member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Thank you so much for joining us today, Linda.
It's my pleasure.
Okay. So we're just going to jump right into our questions for you. Could you talk a little bit about how you got involved with your research and with NSHAP?
Well, I've always been interested in social relationships, and my whole career I've worked on women's employment and how that's connected to their family and marriage and cohabitation, divorce, mortality. And I got interested in aging, I think in about 1990 when a colleague, Lee Lillard, and I designed and applied for a center on aging, but it was a research center projects. And I've been working on aging ever since. So I'm still working on social relationships. My focus has shifted toward health. And I'm just excited about the ideas and about the collaborations and about the innovations that are happening in the field. So it's a very exciting time to be a researcher in this area.
Thank you. Yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of the innovations you mentioned?
In NSHAP, I'd love to. So NSHAP really started collecting data. We started applying for funding in probably the early 2000s. We designed and carried out our first data collection in 2005, 2006. What was innovative about this at that time was that there were a number of things. First, I think we included this was an in-person personal interview of about 3,000 community dwelling older adults in the US. And we included about an hour of biomeasures, which was quite new at the time. We had a couple of physicians who were on the team. We were looking at, and one of them is the gynecologist obstetrician. So we included things you might get in a medical exam in a doctor's office, but as you were coming into the office, and they did the 4 things they do. But we got finger stick blood. We did height, weight, and waist circumference. We did vision, taste, touch, and smell, weight, and vaginal swabs. So that was new, and we developed a lot of the protocols. Now, people in anthropology were doing a lot of this stuff, and that was very helpful. But we're still doing, and I think the field has shifted toward doing these functional and physiological measures. I think it's moved the field and the data collection, both survey data collection and the research, just forward enormously and enormously quickly. It's just been wonderful. We also designed a innovative measure of social networks that has since been taken up by several large surveys, including SHARE. And we designed a survey administration for a clinical cognitive measure, the Montreal Cognitive Assessment that NHANES is now using. And we collected a complete medication log, which has been enormously valuable. We did that from the first interview, and we've done it every interview since. These things, along with the regular survey questions, allow you to really triangulate on, say, hypertension, where we collected measures of blood pressure, so you know if they're measuring high at the interview. We also know if a doctor's ever told them that they have high blood pressure, and we know if they're taking antihypertensive meds. So for a lot of things, we have 3 measures, and then you can start to pick apart where are things going well or going wrong, and look at how the social stuff, like social relationships or social networks, affects the likelihood that you're getting good medical care and that you're being diagnosed and you're being adequately treated. So those are all things that have spread throughout. I don't know that anybody else is getting a medication log, anybody, like HRS, but it's absolutely worth it. It's been wonderful. And I think there's been a lot of very important publications from those data. We also get sensory function, which has turned out to be enormously important for social life. If you don't see well, if you don't hear well, if you don't smell well, then your social life is impaired.
Thank you. Yeah, I think all of what you described makes NSHAP very desirable for different research opportunities. It's very versatile. As far as other studies that I've seen that collect, the medication logs, my most recent example that comes to mind from a data user support request is SALSA, the SALSA studies. They collected some medication logs. But yeah, so I think, I don't know, it's amazing. There's multiple uses. There's a sensory network, the Sense Network. They, did a side project with us to identify sensory impairment or sensory health variables in existing data collections, and NSHAP, was identified as having some of those. So yeah, those are great value to the research community. So would you like to talk a little bit about some of the main objectives with NSHAP and the major findings, the things that you've found to be the most significant?
Well, the main objective of NSHAP was always to understand the links between the social world, what sometimes I call social health, and other dimensions or domains of health, like cognitive function, physical health and illness, physical functionality, mental health, and the interplay back and forth. So we really, I think, that's the main objective, to understand the social world and how it's a component of health. So the most important, I'm just going to give you a few examples. There have been so many. Well, the importance of social networks. That's and how many different aspects there are of social networks, how big they are, whether people mention their spouse when we ask them who they talk to about important things, the differences between Black, white, and Hispanic older adults, how people gain and lose social network connections, the, the, the links between social network characteristics and health behaviors. So I can think of my own work most easily, but with Erin York Cornwell, we looked at, again, using the medication logs and the measures at hypertension in NSHAP. And the sample divided into quarters really pretty neatly. About a quarter were normotensive. They had normal blood pressure and they had never been diagnosed with hypertension. About a quarter had been diagnosed with hypertension, but we measured them as normal, meaning they were well treated medically. About a quarter didn't know they had never been diagnosed, but we measured them high, so undiagnosed, and a group that knew that they were hypertensive, but we still measured them high. So they were being inadequately treated medically. And this turned out to be connected to the size of their social network, but only if they talked to the people in their network about health. Then a larger network increased the risk that they were controlled, that they had hypertension. They were diagnosed, they had hypertension, but they were controlled. Another finding on social networks is that people tend to lose that network numbers over 5 years between interviews, but most people add in for people, they replace those they lost, and most people stay about the same size and about the same configurations. But Black older adults are more likely to lose and not replace. One of the most important findings, I think, was in the sensory function. We have an otolaryngologist on the team, and Martha McClintock, who's been a key researcher in this area for a long time. So we assessed olfaction, and they found that people who couldn't identify any of 4 common household odors faced a 35% higher likelihood of dying in the next 5 years than people like them who had normal olfaction. Turns out olfactory function also predicts incident Alzheimer's disease. It's sensitive to exposure to particulate matter, which we've also linked to the data set. And the team has developed a measure of global sensory function, which is also extremely important. It's like frailty. It's a conglomerate measure that does a lot more than any one thing. So that's been amazing. My former colleague, Kate Cagney, now at the University of Michigan, did use the first round and the second round, which bookended the Great Recession, and looked at linked data on the area in which people lived and home foreclosures, and found that people who lived in a neighborhood with a high level of home foreclosures, whose own home was not foreclosed, were at heightened risk of developing depressive symptoms. That's pretty exciting. Most of my own work is on sexuality, on marriage and cohabitation. One of the interesting things, and this is just showed up in the data set, there are more older adults who have a special friend than there are who have a cohabiting partner. So this, having an intimate partner you don't live with is remarkably common, more so than living with somebody you're not married to. And those relationships, other people have found, are different in a lot of important ways. But one thing we find is that older adults get many of the same emotional benefits from a partnership in any of these categories. Is that enough for the moment?
That's amazing. Yeah, I think just kind of thinking about everything you said, about social networks and aging and, people replacing people they've lost over time. Yeah, it's interesting because I would guess that a lot of people think it's hard to make new friends the older you get. And so those relationships that you lose, hit hard. So it's interesting. Well, I'm happy to hear people replace those relationships effectively, with exception to the demographic group that you mentioned. Is so yeah, it's just really interesting. And then impairment, any kind of lack of an ability that you need just kind of navigating the world that isolates people. And the more people you can talk to about that can offer solutions and help, it does make sense to me that that would make you more likely to live longer and just be healthier. You also have more support, more help. And then as far as partnerships with older adults, I the things that are important in life become more clear to you, I think. And relationships are just one of those really important things. um yeah, and it looks like so our director James McNally is here, and he has a point to just say that one of the great things about the sexuality series is that you showed that treating older adults as adults when you ask sensitive questions gets you a serious response. And so NSHAP is just wonderful. You've made amazing work available to the research community. And yeah, if you'd like to say anything else,
Yeah,
we welcome
one
it.
more thing I thought of. When NSHAP started and we started submitting articles to the medical literature,
Mhm.
we'd get reviewer comments that said things like, well, you say it's nationally representative, prove it.
Yeah.
What do you mean? How can that be? Um, and we cracked the major medical journals fairly early on. And as each peer-reviewed article, was published in a good place, it became easier. And now I think they're, especially the medical journals in aging, like the Journal of the American Geriatric Society, but much more broadly, are accept that this is a valid data source and that there are many interesting things you can learn. So those walls have crumbled. We also see lots more interest from medical students, medical residents who want to use the data and have some analytic skills and are fascinated by loneliness and hearing, for example, or having a spouse who's has cognitive limitations and
Yeah.
how that affects. So it's wonderful. That's really one of the most important things that we've done. Opened
Thank
up
you.
this interdisciplinary communication.
Yes, definitely. So you kind of started to talk a little bit about this with the publications and the nationally representative sample as a wall. So that kind of provides a natural segue for me to ask, what are some of the challenges of the research process with NSHAP?
You mean for the data user or for the survey data constructor?
Yeah, I think if you want to talk about, the challenges of the process of collecting the data, you can we welcome you to talk about challenges that potential secondary data users may face as well. It's, just kind of whatever you think of as challenges other people might need to know about, or that you think are interesting, related to
No,
your
the,
research.
the
Yeah.
truth is that the pressing questions change. So, as somebody who's designing a data collection, or anybody who does, has a conflict between maintaining a series, a longitudinal series, and um, and pivoting toward things that are really important now that haven't been asked before or in a different way. So we're interested in much more than we were at the beginning on questions of discrimination, early advantageous or disadvantageous life experiences. We're much more interested in and haven't done nearly enough on aging, the social aging process for underrepresented minorities, for Blacks and Hispanics. We oversampled. Those oversamples we see now in retrospect were not big enough. And we didn't have enough questions that spoke to those experiences. So that's one of the things that's a challenge. How do you
Yeah.
stay current, address the issues that are most pressing now, and still maintain a longitudinal
Yeah. Unfortunately, I
sample.
think that's pretty common of a lot
Absolutely.
of studies that, in the past, they didn't sample underrepresented populations enough, to make good inferences, and serve those communities. But, I think there's a lot of things in retrospect that we can look back on and then not make changes. And so I think it's, just important that you are continuing to make changes to correct that.
And COVID, of course, was a big deal, and everybody did special data collections on that. But
Hmm.
we learned a lot from that process that um, we could ask some of the things that were standard, but in a different way. What's changed, instead of asking the 10 questions in the scale and then measuring the change? And it's different. It's shorter, but it's richer in some ways too. If you ask people to reflect on
Sure.
how they perceive change. So I think that was actually great for survey research in some ways.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. So, what advice would you give to potential researchers trying to use NSHAP?
Well, what I suggest is that what I always do, is read through the questionnaire. Those materials are available. Read it this is what I do. Read it as if you're a respondent, and it'll, and then look at all the measures too that weren't in the questionnaire. There's a leave behind questionnaire, and all the physical and physiological and functional measures. So become acquainted with it, and you'll probably come with interests on some issue. And I think the place to start is there. If you have questions, and people do this all the time, oh, I can't find this, is it available? Then we're happy to help. Uh, and but that's what I'd say.
Thank you.
You
I think
probably
that's,
already read the literature that gives that chap, and then read the questionnaires and take.
yes. Thank you. That's excellent advice. I think, the top answer to this question that I've noticed is read. Read the documentation, but I like your spin on it. Read the questionnaire as if you were a respondent. That's wonderful. Thank you. I usually like to ask people what conferences or professional meetings and networks would you recommend, if any? Like you said, people can reach out anytime when they have questions to NORC, the NSHAP team, to NACDA. We are happy to field any questions as well. But yeah, are there any meetings you'd recommend that you think would be valuable related to people trying to study similar social health issues and aging?
So, of course, there are medical conferences uh, that are focused, which have sessions focused on aging, and the Gerontological Association of America meetings, of course. Um, and then within the American Sociological Association has a section on aging in the life course that almost always has relevant presentations. Uh, and but both the medical and the social associations of various kinds, Population Association of America, of course, and I participate in lots of the medical conferences, but it's generally as a not as a first author. So I know less about this. There's lots going on. There's also lots going on in the medical journals on uh, on rudimentary measures of, say, social isolation and loneliness. Uh, but that's also a place to learn
Sure. Yeah, and network, you know,
and network.
meet people interested in similar topics, but maybe not in the same field and collaborate. Thank you. Those are great suggestions. Our last question for today is what excites you about being a researcher now? I know you talked about how the innovation is exciting, but if there's anything else that, in your work that you're just like, this is what keeps me going with this. Yeah, please.
There are always new questions. There are always things you'd like to know if only you could ask. Uh, there are always more things to dig into deeply than there is time to do it. So, of course, everybody now who does this kind of work is very interested in cognitive function and changes in cognitive function because it's cognitive limitations, dementia, are so costly financially, socially. The cost to the families is just amazing. And so, how to understand that and is, of course, exciting and pressing. It's so important. Of course, minority communities and how aging works differently in minority communities. And we know it does. Uh, we can see just on the gross statistics of life expectancy or changes during COVID, but we don't know nearly enough about it, and we don't have enough people working on it. A question is social change across cohorts. How are the people who are becoming older now different from people who went through this part of the life course 30 years ago? What's changed about aging, and how is it important? That's a really important question.
Yeah.
So all of those things interest me. And then we see other people coming with such fascinating questions to the data that that's very rewarding.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, I definitely get that. Stay curious and ask questions. And, when you're talking about how is aging now different than aging in another, generation or a time point. It makes me think of, I don't know if you've seen this on the internet, but they'll show these pictures side by side where it's like somebody famous who's whatever 40, 50, 60 now versus what somebody famous at that same age looked like 20 years ago or whatever. And the theme is that like we look younger now at the same age as somebody compared to somebody, 20 or 30 years ago at the same age. So I think that that's, like you said, an interesting question. And, it is inspiring. It's important to take these issues and say, I want to help fix this, particularly with the cognitive health and the weight that that places on people and the people around them that have those issues. So yeah, thank you.
My pleasure.
If there's anything else that you wanted to say, please feel free.
No,
Okay.
I could talk forever about these data and about the process, but I think we've said plenty.
Wonderful. Well, we have been just so honored to talk with you. Thank you so much for everything that you and your team does with NSHAP. We're delighted to make NSHAP available to the research community, and you can find it on the NACDA site by just typing in NSHAP, and you'll find 3 rounds of NSHAP on our site along with the COVID sub-study. And thank you so much for everyone who's listening in, and we'll share the links to the studies we referenced in the YouTube description. And if you have any questions or ideas for our audience, please email us at icpsr-nacda@umich.edu. And thank you so much again, Linda.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Wonderful.
And thank you for all you do for our data set and to make it available.
Oh, thank you. Yes, we are happy to.